Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, and that was the closing bell on Wall Street, with markets seeing green, up roughly 600 points about the possibility of a peace deal between the U.S. and Iran, with both sides today signaling potential signs of progress. Oil prices also falling below $100 a barrel today in hopes that a potential deal could reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That's where, of course, 20% of the world's oil and gas flow through. Gas prices just hit a new high of the war, $4.54 a gallon. But in the last 24 hours, President Trump has offered mixed messages about where things stand, telling NBC's Garrett Haake during an event in the Oval Office this afternoon he believes Iran wants to make a deal, but also the U.S. has won the fight.
You're facing an opponent right now in Iran that has refused to submit. You seem optimistic now that you may be closer to a deal. What's different about this moment now than in other moments where a deal has seemed close?
Well, why do you say they refused to submit? You don't know that. You don't know what's going on.
They were firing on U.S. ships a few days ago.
Yeah, no, a few days ago is a long time ago. You know, in the world of war, a few days ago. No, they want to make a deal badly. And we'll see if we get there. If we get there, they can't have nuclear weapons. You know, it's very simple. But what's not to submit? And their leaders are all dead. So I think we won. Now we have to get what we have to get. If we don't do that, we'll have to go a big step further. But with that being said, they want to make a deal. We've had very good talks over the last 24 hours, and it's very possible that we'll make a deal.
Deadlines are on, President? Is there a deadline? Do you have a deadline when you expect to hear back?
Never a deadline. It'll happen. It'll happen, but never a deadline.
In a post on social media this morning, President Trump warning Tehran if it doesn't agree to a deal, quote, the bombing starts and it will be sadly at a much higher level and intensity than it was before. For its part, Iran says it is reviewing the U.S. proposal, but has yet to convey its response to Pakistani mediators. All of this comes after President Trump announced yesterday he was pausing Project Freedom. That's the U.S. military operation to guide vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, just 2 days into the operation. The president's top economic advisor trying to explain that decision today.
The president showed with his resolve that we were willing to start escorting ships through. And I think that that was maybe the thing that pushed the Iranians one step closer to making a deal. I can tell you that I was walking around in and out of the building yesterday, seeing a lot of action in the Situation Room with negotiators, and it looked like the mood was high. It looked like the mood was high. That we'll have to see what happens. You never know with the Iranians, but absolutely it looks like the folks that are negotiating these things seem to be feeling like they're making a lot of progress right now.
Despite that optimism from the administration, the war remains unpopular, with the president underwater on his handling of the war, as well as his handling of the economy. The economic dissatisfaction in part driven by rising gas prices, with 63% of Americans blaming President Trump for the increase in prices. That includes almost a third of Republicans. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, and Ken Pollack, vice president for policy at the Middle East Institute. Thanks to all of you for joining us, for starting us off. Monica, let me start with you at the White House. What are you hearing from your sources about the status of peace negotiations at this hour?
Well, Kristen, there is a sort of sense of optimism, but it's something that I have to say we have heard time and time again throughout the course of this 10-week conflict, where it appears like the administration wants to project that there is perhaps more progress than there actually is. That is what this moment feels like. But the president, again, is saying he believes there has been progress over the last 24 hours. He believes Iran wants to make a deal very badly, though we should say that whenever the president has said that in recent weeks, there have been signs from Iran that really point to the opposite, where they have maintained and been quite resilient and quite defiant. So whether this time is different, that is the real question. But it does appear as if the president is implying that there is a discussion over these multi-point plans that we have been talking about again for weeks. But the real central issue here is what might be different this time. And the president said, again, he feels that he's going to be able to solve this potentially through negotiation, but at the same time and in the same breath is continuing to make these threats and potentially considering resuming major combat operations. So it does still seem to be a juncture that we've been at before, only for the president to make that threat, back down from it again, say that then in-person negotiations maybe need to take place, and then this process sort of all starts all over again. It feels like we're in that moment, even though the difference here, Kristen, is that the president is saying it's unlikely that he will send his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and special envoy Steve Witkoff for any kind of in-person talks. Right now, it seems like all of this is happening more behind the scenes.
Well, Monica, let me follow up with you on these multi-part potential plans that are coming together. What do you know about what's in them? What would a potential agreement look like at this point, Mon?
And according to the president, it has been what he has said from the beginning of this, that for the U.S., from the U.S. perspective, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, that it needs to abandon its nuclear programs. There is a lot riding on whatever Iran and the U.S. may agree to when it comes to the enriched uranium. As for today, our own colleague Kelly O'Donnell asked the president what the plan was going to be for the enriched uranium in terms of getting it out of Iran. The president told her, quote, "We're going to get it." When Kelly followed up and said, "But how, Mr. President, would that work?" he simply repeated, "We're going to get it." So that is still a major sticking point that is likely to be the subject of a lot of conversation, as well as whatever happens with the Strait of Hormuz, the timing of all of this. And we should just remind everybody that back when the JCPOA, when that nuclear deal was negotiated with Iran years ago, that process took so much time. This is not the kind of thing that can really be hashed out in a matter of days. It's a much longer process. So is this the potential beginning of that? It's also unclear, but that certainly seems to be what the administration wants people to think. Again, we've been here before, only for that to pretty much collapse. Kristen.
Yeah, absolutely, Mon. And of course, all of this happening, gas prices continue to tick up. They're hovering close to $5 a gallon, as we mentioned. The majority of Americans blame President Trump for that increased price at the pump. The president's also set to leave on that trip to China next week. How does all of this, Monica, factor into some of the pressure that's building on the president to bring this war to an end?
And there is an absolute awareness on both of those fronts, and they are major factors in any conversation and any discussion that the president is having around the war. Specifically, when you talk about that trip to Beijing, the president is supposed to be leaving about a week from now, and I am told that is such a priority for the administration that they are basically trying to ensure that everything goes according to plan, that the president is going to be able to go on that trip. Remember, he already had to postpone it and move it once because of the war against Iran. So for now, that is a factor, we know, in these discussions, and certainly that is something that has contributed to the president's timeline here, the way he's making these decisions. And certainly when posed to the White House about whether they would like this all to be wrapped up before he leaves for China, the president said, yes, that would be ideal. But in terms of how that would actually work, that's a far more complicated question.
All right, Monica Alba covering a lot of ground for us and starting us off today. Monica, as always, thank you so much. Courtney, Kube, let me turn to you. So, of course, we've been talking about these tensions that are increasing in the Strait of Hormuz, and the Pentagon today saying it fired on a ship that it believed was violating the U.S. blockade. What do we know about that, and how does that fit into this broader picture?
So that answers one question. The blockade is definitely still in effect by the U.S. military. It was an Iranian-flagged tanker that was making its way through the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. military reached out to it several times. They said, hey, you're in violation of the blockade. You better turn back around. They didn't do so. This is the first time that we're aware of, anyway, during this blockade where the U.S. in this case launched an F-18 off the USS Abraham Lincoln, and it actually fired its cannon guns and took out the rudder of that ship that the U.S. said was in violation of the blockade. So it's no longer headed towards the port in Iran, according to U.S. Central Command. That's the first time that we're aware of where there's actually been a fighter jet that's taken out this ship, as opposed to other ways that they've firing directly from the ship down onto the ship that's in violation of the blockade.
Well, it's just so significant because that's the focus of so much of the tensions that have been building. Secretary Pete Hegseth said yesterday that hundreds of ships are lining up to transit the Strait of Hormuz, and then President Trump paused the program. What's behind the thinking of pausing this?
Yeah, that's been the big question that we've been trying to figure out. It's not a secret that this was a surprise to a lot of people who were involved. We do know that there were ships that were lined up both physically and sort of getting ready to get in line to make their way through that passageway. As far as we know, the U.S. has only announced or acknowledged that they brought 2 U.S. flagships through that passageway. That was on Monday. We're not aware of any that actually went through yesterday. But the U.S. military was definitely ready to continue this and make this a passageway where they would bring ships through for the foreseeable future. it was cut off. I mean, only, 36 hours into it, so only the 2 got through that we're aware of.
Wow. And you have new reporting about that. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, we were trying to figure out, ever since President Trump announced this on social media on Sunday afternoon, exactly what this was going to look like, even though it was somewhat short-lived. A U.S. official told us today that, in fact, it's paused right now. It's not actually clear that it's not going to potentially restart at some point, but for now they're calling it paused. We knew that this involved U.S. Navy ships that were somewhere inside the Gulf, somewhere in the Gulf of Oman. We knew that there were aircraft that were involved that were sort of flying over watch as the ships would make their way through the passageway. We know that the U.S. military was involved with drones and robotics that were clearing the way of any potential mines in advance of this all starting. But what we learned yesterday is that, in fact, the U.S. military also embarked U.S. military security teams on those first 2 ships that went through. They were Marine security elements. And that just shows how seriously they were taking this. And also, it really ups the potential danger for the U.S. military, because we know now that both of those ships took fire in the form of Iranian cruise missiles, Iranian drones, and that at least 6 Iranian small fast boats were making their way towards those ships, threatening them as they were making their transit.
Wow. All right, Courtney, a lot to keep track of. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Ken, let me turn to you. So the Trump administration, as Monica was laying out, appears to be striking a note of optimism about these peace negotiations, but obviously there's plenty of reason to be pessimistic. The president says Iran wants to make a deal, but it seems like they're leaning towards this short-term solution. How does that address the broader problem of Iran's nuclear program?
Apologies. You'd think by now I'd have learned to unmute myself. So first, I think that Monica's skepticism is well warranted. We've heard this from the Trump administration before. Let's also recognize the Iranian regime is badly divided, to say the least. We've heard all kinds of voices there. It's not entirely clear who is in charge, although so far we've mostly seen the hardliners as the ones who have been making the decisions out there. And so I think that we have to take all of this with more than a few grains of salt. That said, there are reasons out there that I think that we can say that this might actually be a moment where we could get a deal. I'll come to the nuclear issue in just a moment, but it's worth recognizing on the pro side for the United States, yes, the U.S. military seems to have gotten to a point where they can protect ships coming through the Strait of Hormuz. That's going to be very frightening to the Iranians. On the con side, the Iranians may be behind the scenes blackmailing our Gulf allies. If they're willing to pay to have ships go through, even if surreptitiously, that would be good for Iran, very bad for us. And then a last factor we should consider, the Chinese. The Chinese are clearly putting a lot of pressure on the Iranians. They may be putting pressure on us as well. That's a mixed bag, but that too may be ultimately bringing us to some kind of an agreement, at least on the Strait. As for the nuclear program, as you point out, it's just not clear where we're actually going to get. The U.S., the Iranians seem pretty far apart on that. And, for President Trump, this is ultimately what that war was about. If the United States can't actually get a deal that deals with Iran's long-term nuclear program over the long term, that may not be a satisfactory end to this war.
Well, it'll be fascinating to see what develops with any negotiations over the next 48, 72 hours. Let me ask you, because according to analysts at S&P, 0 ships have transited the Strait of Hormuz today. What do you make of the president's decision to pause that operation to guide vessels through the strait? What are the implications of that?
Well, first, Kristen, I'm as mystified as anybody else is. I don't know exactly what's going on. Again, I can certainly create a narrative whereby the Iranians may have gone very quickly to the Pakistanis and said, you know what, we like the latest proposal from the United States. We like it enough that we're close to saying yes, but just ask the president to pause Operation Project Freedom, and we'll get back to him. We'll take that as a sign of his seriousness if he's willing to do so. And again, because the U.S. Navy and I think the entire U.S. government actually does feel like Project Freedom really is doing its job, right? That this may be a real game changer in the Strait of Hormuz. I suspect that they were willing to take that pause to see if the Iranians are actually serious.
And Ken, just quickly before I let you go, do you see any evidence of Iran's nuclear program having been, as President Trump said, obliterated or significantly weakened?
So, look, no one actually knows, Kristen, because, of course, the strikes back in June buried the vast majority of the program. And, we just haven't had the kind of inspections that we would need to know for certain. That said, there is a high degree of confidence among, a whole wide variety of experts all over the world believe that ultimately, yes, the program was extensively buried. The enriched uranium is buried. But that also, of course, creates the questions around, well, then why did we feel the need to start this war if the Iranian nuclear program had been so badly set back, which everyone seemed to believe it was.
All right, Ken Pollack, thank you so much for your insights and great information today. We really appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.